A Conservative and Labour MP to the Sue Gray report and all the political fallout. Also with a white paper on levelling up due to be released tomorrow, the Prime Minister's a chance to reset his premiership. But can he achieve levelling up, and really, what is it? Well, exploring that. And as Boris Johnson has touched on in Ukraine, we'll speak with President Zelensky. He's speaking with President Zelensky. I'd love to say that we are, but he is, in an attempt to get Putin to back down from the prospect of war. We'll be looking at what more Britain can do to try and prevent that possible invasion. And as always, do get in touch. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews. That and a hell of a lot more between 3 and 4. But first, at the top of the hour, here's the latest news with Rosie White.
Good afternoon, it's just 1 minute past 3. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The Prime Minister is meeting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine to try to find a diplomatic solution to tensions with Russia. A call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin was due to be held yesterday, has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Samantha de Burden from the Institute of International Affairs says there is still hope for a peaceful resolution.
Diplomacy is continuing. So that is always a good sign. And you have to remember that Putin actually has a lot to lose. And I think that the plans that Liz Truss unveiled yesterday to say that Russian oligarchs in Putin's close
I'll be back with you shortly. I'm sorry, we've been having a few technical problems this morning, but the Prime Minister, you remember, he apologised yesterday after the Sue Gray report into alleged Downing Street parties found failures of leadership and judgment. Boris Johnson says an updated version of the inquiry will be published after the police investigation is completed. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen told GB News the buck stops with the Prime Minister.
We've got a concession from the Prime Minister that he will release the Sue Gray report unredacted in full. All we've seen is 12 pages of filleted report, but that was actually damning enough. Serious misjudgments and leadership across Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, widening the blame, never mentioning the Prime Minister, but ultimately he sets the culture in Number 10 and the government.
Meanwhile, Downing Street says the Prime Minister stands by his comments in the Commons yesterday about Sir Keir Starmer's record as a prosecutor.
Leader of the Opposition, a former Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr Speaker, said he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out.
The Labour leader says claims he failed to prosecute the offender are false. Sir Keir was Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, but he was not directly involved in the case. The House of Commons Speaker says he's far from satisfied that the Prime Minister's comments were appropriate. The Met Police says it's deeply sorry for the appalling conduct of one of its team. It's after a watchdog found evidence of bullying, racism and misogyny within its ranks. The Independent Office for Police Conduct investigated 14 officers at Charing Cross Police Station. 2 were dismissed for gross misconduct, 2 quit, and several others faced disciplinary action. The IOPC says the issues are not isolated to the one team and that the Met needs to rebuild public trust and confidence. Around 1,600 Tesco staff are facing redundancy. The supermarket chain's going to stop replenishing stock overnight at dozens of stores, and some of its petrol stations will no longer be staffed out of hours. Tesco's also closing its Jack's discount shop, saying it wants to focus on its core business. National Highways will not face corporate manslaughter charges over 2 fatal crashes on a smart motorway. Police have announced they won't be taking action after investigating the deaths of 3 people on the M1 last year. It's after a coroner concluded there was an ongoing risk of future deaths on motorways without a clear hard shoulder. More than 1 in 10 children are starting school in England without having had their measles, mumps and rubella jab. Take-up of the vaccine is at its lowest rate in a decade. The World Health Organization says 95% of children need to be jabbed to keep the measles at bay. But the current coverage for 2 doses of the MMR jab is around 85%. Dr Sarah Kayett says even a small drop in vaccine take-up can cause problems.
We know that even small insults in that level can result in outbreaks on a population level. And I think with COVID restrictions coming down, travel becoming more popular again, we have to remember that there may be travel from more endemic areas where measles is more endemic, and that will mean outbreaks will start happening.
The online word game Wordle has been sold to the New York Times. The hugely successful online puzzle went for an undisclosed sum in the low 7 figures. Its creator says the word game's popularity became overwhelming to run. The US newspaper has hinted it may not remain free to play in the future. You're up to date now on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now, the briefing with Darren.
Thank you indeed, Rosie. 6 minutes past 3 o'clock on this Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for your company on TV, online and on the radio. This is GB News and the briefing. Well, even by Westminster standards, yesterday was pretty dramatic. After weeks of anticipation and waiting, Sue Gray finally handed over her initial findings on those alleged lockdown parties in Number 10 to the government and to the Prime Minister, who published them. And, of course, Boris Johnson appeared before MPs to make a statement around this time yesterday. Pretty fair to say it was an ill-tempered session of questions, followed by the Prime Minister's statements. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said that the British people believe Johnson should do the decent thing and resign, while the SNP's Ian Blackford was told to leave the Commons chamber after saying Boris Johnson had lied. Very unparliamentary. Well, here's a reminder of yesterday's dramatic events from Mark White.
It is an image that drew widespread condemnation well before the publication of Sue Gray's report. Anger at the sight of the Prime Minister alongside his wife and other Number 10 staff enjoying cheese and wine in the Downing Street garden while the rest of the nation endured COVID lockdown. This gathering, and more than a dozen others in possible breach of COVID laws, have plunged Boris Johnson's government into weeks of crisis. The official Cabinet Office report into the culture that allowed these events is damning. With the Scotland Yard investigation underway, Sue Gray could only deliver partial conclusions, but they still make deeply uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister and his team. She found at least some of the gatherings in question represent a serious failure to observe not just the high standards expected of those working at the heart of government, but also of the standards expected of the entire British population at the time. There were, she said, failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office at different times. In the Commons, the Prime Minister was contrite.
I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone.
The senior civil servant took particular aim at the lack of leadership throughout Downing Street that allowed for clearly inappropriate behaviour, even in the midst of a global pandemic. Sue Gray's report said at times it seems there was too little thought given to what was happening across the country in considering the appropriateness of some of these gatherings, the risks they presented to public health, and how they might appear to the public.
Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign.
There is considerable anger within political circles that this report has been severely restricted in its initial scope because of the official police investigation into a number of the Downing Street parties and a request from Scotland Yard not to prejudice their ongoing investigation.
So we've just received that, and my officers are prioritising this week to consider what's been provided in that bundle of material, what further investigations that they need to do, and of course who they're going to be contacted. But at the moment, no, I do not know exactly who will be contacted.
The Prime Minister's critics say they fear he's been able to kick the Partygate fallout into the long grass, with so far no commitment to publish the second part of Sue Gray's report in full. In truth, though, this only prolongs his protracted discomfort as political opponents and the media refuse to move on from a row that continues to seriously damage his premiership. Mark White, GB News.
Well, I'm now joined by Jake Perry. He is the Conservative MP for Rosendale and Darwen and also chair of the Northern Research Group in Parliament. Thank you, Jake, indeed, for joining us. Just on Partygate, if we can start on that, has the Prime Minister got your fulsome support?
He has, Laura. I mean, it was a really busy and extraordinary day in Parliament yesterday. He has my support because, you know, despite all the facts being out there now, what do we see today? We see the Prime Minister going to Ukraine to, you know, do his best to avert what is the most serious conflict in Europe that we have, you know, stood on the step of for probably 30 years. And that's really what being a leader is about. It's about when the big calls are required, are you the right person to lead the nation? And I'm sure that Boris Johnson still is.
Is there any circumstances in which your support would be withdrawn? I mean, I don't get too hypothetical about it, but he is being investigated, or certainly events inside his home, or for the events particularly linked to him by the police. I mean, if they were to find that he himself had broken the lockdown rules, the law, I mean, is it sustainable, his position, if that was the case?
Well, I don't want to be drawn on what is an active and ongoing police investigation. You know, colleagues, including me, will make their mind up about their support or not for the Prime Minister when they've seen the conclusion of that investigation.
OK, let me finally end on this on Partygate. Let me put it another way, which is, you know, we didn't have to be here. I mean, the Prime Minister insisted, as did his spokespeople, throughout the end of November, the start of December, that there were no parties, that all the guidance was followed. I mean, that's clearly not the case now. We know that. I think even the Prime Minister might well accept that that is not the case. I mean, if Downing Street had been more honest, more upfront about what had happened, we might not be looking at police investigations. We might not look at this parliamentary turmoil and the distraction it's clearly causing the government and everyone else. Do you accept that the handling of all this and the handling by the Prime Minister himself could have been a hell of a lot better?
Absolutely. You know, this could have been handled a lot better, as you say. I really welcome the police investigation, however, because if I think about my constituents in Rosendale and Darwen, they want to know that there isn't one rule for people who work in Downing Street and another rule for them. I think the police investigation does give that reassurance that those who have breached the law will be prosecuted or punished. I think that's the correct thing to do, just as my constituents were prosecuted or punished if they broke lockdown. And, you know, I think that's what people want to see. The law should apply to all of us equally, and the police should be enforcing that law with gusto.
Now, one of the reasons we've got you on, and I was going to be in Macclesfield today, it didn't work out because of what happened yesterday, but I'm going to Burnley this evening. I'll also be in Blackpool this week. We're looking, of course, at levelling up, the flagship policy of the government that's due to be announced tomorrow by Michael Gove. You've been at the forefront of this, essentially campaigning and inputting an awful lot into this. What do you want to see, what do you expect to see in that report tomorrow that will make levelling up a success?
Well, I mean, firstly, it's very nice of you to say I've been at the forefront of it. In fact, it's my colleagues, the 80-plus Conservative MPs across the north of England who's been at the forefront. We've been working together to make sure that the white paper is delivered on time and that it's exciting. Look, we'll see what's in it tomorrow, but I just give one word of caution in advance of it being released, is white papers in government can often be a distraction. And what colleagues and voters across the north of England want to see is real change and real change now. So we can't allow the discussion of political theory to distract from getting on and improving people's lives. George Osborne didn't need a white paper when he was Chancellor to do a devolution deal for Manchester. Theresa May didn't need a white paper to do town deals for towns across the north of England. So while we absolutely welcome this, and this is about sort of hardwiring levelling up across government for the next decade, we also do not want the discussions around the white paper to distract from the real job, getting on and delivering for communities.
And just very finally on this, though, isn't your concern that expectations are high? Because, frankly, the government has put them at a certain level, suggesting that this is entirely necessary for the future of the country, but it's not deliverable. I mean, there's government insiders telling journalists that even Michael Gove, the Secretary of State, thinks that lots of this white paper is poo, quite frankly, that there's not an awful lot of new money and that it's not going to be as transformative as people think.
Well, expectations should be high. That's absolutely what colleagues will expect, not least because let's not forget that the communities like the ones I represent and other communities in the north of England have almost been ignored by government for decades. They have, various governments of all political parties have overseen the decimation of our economy and, standards slipping both in healthcare. The income differential between the north and south of England in some areas is as great as it was between East and West Germany before the Berlin Wall fell. So we absolutely should have huge expectation and ambition for the north. And the real justification for doing this isn't to drag the south down anyway. It's actually that Britain can only succeed if all parts of our economy are firing on all cylinders, if we deliver that northern powerhouse and we turn the north of England through reindustrialisation and through green-collar jobs back into the powerhouse of Britain's economy once again.
OK. Jake Berry, appreciate your time. Looking forward to heading up north in the next couple of hours. Jake Berry there joining us from Parliament. Well, we were talking there, weren't we, of course, about Sue Gray's report and whether you, frankly, at home are interested in this. Are you indignant, think the Prime Minister should go, or you think we should be talking about other things altogether? Well, a reporter, Bradley Harris, has been in Lee in Wigan to find out what you reckon.
In the scheme of things, and I haven't lost anybody, so, but it has made a really stupid mistake as far as I'm concerned. It really has. And I think it could be his undoing, and yet he's been a good Prime Minister. He's approachable. He seems approachable to me, but I don't know the man. All I know is that all these vaccines and everything have been done, and just, what can I say? I like him. Nobody's going to change my mind about that.
Not even the parties?
No. Well, the parties was a terrible, terrible... People couldn't go and see the parents. People were dying in homes and everything. And he was out partying. But then there's so much going on in the world. But he was out of order. Yeah, he was. Shouldn't have had the party. Silly boy.
Disappointed. I think disappointed is the biggest word, because you've got a government that's dictating what you should do. We're all trying to stay indoors, we're trying to keep apart from people, we're trying to keep everybody safe. But the powers that be that are dictating to you and telling you this, they're not following their own rules and their own guidance. They tell me they followed the science all the way through. What science have they followed? We're trying to do our best to keep everybody safe. So a lot of people have lost a lot of loved ones during this. Couldn't go to funerals, couldn't attend, couldn't even meet people, and they've been having parties. It's not great. It's not great. It doesn't look good on him. I don't know how he's going to rebuild the confidence in people now. It'll be hard for him.
Do you think people should be so upset about these parties?
I don't know, because I'm not upset about it. I do feel one rule for one and one rule for another, but everybody's to their own. Just get on with it, really.
Well, the Prime Minister was an idiot. He set the rules. They should have basically stuck by the rules. The Queen had the decency to stick by the rules herself when Prince Philip died. Why couldn't he? How is he above the Queen? He's not. Bottom line is, he should have been beyond reproach. He's made himself look like an idiot. He's made his government look like an idiot. What more can you say?
There you go. That's what the people of Lee in Wigan think. Well, let's get a response now. Let's join the Shadow Minister for Local Government, Mike Amesbury, who joined us. Mike, from the Labour Party, thank you very much indeed. Clearly, opinion there, frankly, not terribly happy with the Prime Minister. He's making the case that, he's in Ukraine today, getting on with the job, focusing on geopolitical events, and that we're just going to have to wait for the police reports.
Look, the Sue Gray's report, which was an update, a partial report, as you correctly asserted, Darren, it is a serious matter. This is a Prime Minister of the day, set the rules, which is a law at the end of the day. Now the police are investigating, quite unprecedented. This is 12 likely breaches of the rules, which is the law, and quite honestly, quite frankly, he should do the honourable thing and go. He's brought dishonour on the position of Prime Minister. He should go. I mean, at the moment, the government is paralysed, certainly not focusing on the bread and butter issues that my constituents and others are referring to and talking about on the doorstep, and that's the cost of living crisis, energy bills going up, the astronomical levels of fraud, which the government seem to have written off as well. And we're forcing votes on those two important matters in Parliament today, while the Prime Minister's scurrying around with his ministers trying to save his skin, trying to save his own job while blaming everybody else.
Yeah, but isn't the point on that, I suppose, Mike, to a large degree, is that, you know, the Prime Minister's made it clear he's not going to resign. You can force him out as the Labour Party alone, or even the opposition parties together. This is going to be decided by the Conservative Party, probably after there's a couple more investigations in terms of the Met and the full Sue Gray report. And it would be better for Her Majesty's opposition, for the Labour Party, to focus on those other issues.
We are certainly focusing on those other issues, such as the cost of living crisis, fraud, which I obviously referred to there, which we're forcing votes in Parliament. But of course, this is a serious matter. You know, we can't have, as certainly you did the Vox Pop there in Lee. They referred to, we can't have one rule for them and another rule for everybody else. This is a Prime Minister, and it's not only Prime Minister, it's those that are trying to save his skin at the moment that should have the best standards in British life. They don't. They're not showing leadership at the moment. You're right on that matter there. He's clearly he won't do the honourable thing and resign. So it's up to those Conservative MPs now to put in the letters. 54 are required, and remove him for the good of our communities, for the good of the country, so we can move on.
OK, and we'll see. We'll have to see what the Conservative Party does about that and their MPs. Just finally, Mike, while I've got you, can we just talk about levelling up for 1 minute? Good. One of the proposals we think is going to be on this is about more devolution of power, that there'll be more local representatives, like mayors that we've got at the moment in different parts of the country. Is that something the Labour Party would welcome? I mean, I assume it would be.
Look, I speak to as a Northern MP as well as the shadow local government minister, and of 11 years of government, the best they can do is shuffle around the deck chairs on this sinking ship. And they're proposing, I think, probably to give us a fiver, although they've stolen the equivalent of a tenner from our communities. Then no, that's not good enough. Look, the real test is going to be, are we going to see good quality jobs in every community up and down the country? Are we going to see better connectivity with real investment in transport, not only in the north, but yes, right across the country? Are we going to power up? You mentioned there devolution. Well, devolution means ensuring that they're given the resources, that's the money to spend, and shape those decisions locally. A lot of those decisions are made, unfortunately, in Whitehall, so it's not our street, it's Downing Street. That's certainly been the trajectory so far. So let's see what comes tomorrow, but we will be pressing the case, obviously, for better quality jobs, secure jobs, safer streets, and actually, yes, genuine devolution, and to power up our communities up and down the country.
OK, Mike, and we'll look forward to that report, and we'll get you back on for your reaction at some point as well. Appreciate your time. That's Mike Amesbury there, the Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Local Government. What do you think about all of this, by the way? Do get in touch, GBViews at gbnews.uk, or tweet us. We'll get to some of those views a little later on in the programme. But first, we are going to pause, take a quick break. Up next, the Prime Minister is in Ukraine this afternoon. He's due to hold a press conference in the next couple of hours. But what can Britain do to prevent war between Russia and Ukraine? We'll be talking about that and a lot more in just a couple of minutes.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it. Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel, they're issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News home and security editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
A very welcome back to GB News. It is just coming up to 3:30 on this Tuesday afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for your company. Lots of you get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed tweet us at GB News. Someone tweeting in saying about the Prime Minister, how many more times can he apologise? His apology means nothing to us. Someone else saying that even a stop clock is right twice a day. That's giving him the benefit of the doubt, though. And someone else saying that actually it should be the other way around, that Boris Johnson has got things right most of the time, and that Keir Starmer is not right when he alleges those things against the Prime Minister. So do get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, though, we're going to be looking at the cost of living crisis. Also, we'll be in Ukraine, looking at the future of the conflict there, just as Boris Johnson speaks to President Zelensky. But first, at 3:30, let's bring you right up to date with the news with Rosie White.
Good afternoon, it is 3:30. I'm Rosie Wright to keep you up to date here on GB News. The Prime Minister has arrived in Ukraine to try to de-escalate tensions with Russia. Boris Johnson will speak to President Volodymyr Zelensky about how they could find a diplomatic solution. A call Boris Johnson had scheduled with Russia's President Vladimir Putin that was supposed to happen yesterday has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Downing Street has suggested the public may never be told if Boris Johnson is fined for breaching lockdown rules. The Prime Minister apologised after the Sue Gray report into alleged Downing Street parties found failures of leadership and judgment. Well, Boris Johnson says an updated version of the inquiry will be published after the police investigation is completed. Around 1,600 Tesco staff are facing redundancy. The supermarket chain's going to stop replenishing stock overnight at dozens of stores, and some of its petrol stations will no longer be staffed out of hours. Tesco's also closing its Jack discount shop, saying instead it wants to focus on its core business. More than 1 in 10 children are starting school in England without having had their measles, mumps and rubella jab. Take-up of the vaccine is at its lowest rate in a decade. The World Health Organization says 95% of children need to be vaccinated to keep measles at bay, but the current coverage for the 2 doses of the MMR jab is around 85%. You are up to date here on GB News. Don't forget we're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. Let's head back there now to the briefing with Darren.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Very welcome back. Now, Boris Johnson's flagship Levelling Up white paper is in serious risk of falling flat when it's published tomorrow, after reports that the government's sources, even the minister responsible, Michael Gove, have privately expressed doubts over the plan. Well, it is due to be launched, and it is the government's flagship programme. It's all about trying to spread opportunity more equally across the country. We're expecting a speech and a statement in the Commons tomorrow. Well, join me now to discuss this is the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, Henry Merson. Thank you very much indeed, Henry, for joining us. Where are your expectations set in all of this?
I think the white paper itself is likely to be very positive. So you were talking to Mike Amesbury about kind of proper devolution. Obviously, Jake Berry was reflecting the fact that you could probably do a lot of that without needing the white paper in the first place. And so I think what you would expect from Michael Gove, and particularly Neil O'Brien, who's been doing a lot of the legwork, who was obviously an architect of the Northern Powerhouse when he was advisor for George Osborne, is proper, significant rebalancing of power with that coherent economic plan. The difficulty they got is that they've inherited a position where the Chancellor has already cut the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the kind of dividend from Brexit. So it's worth less overall than the money coming to the English regions and probably to places like Wales as well than it was pre-Brexit. And so without Rishi and others giving the sort of money that's needed, without the Prime Minister banging heads around the cabinet table, he's obviously been, as we know, pretty distracted and post rail cuts the North last year, probably a bit unfocused, to be honest, on an ambitious agenda for the North. So I think there is some real difficulties there for the wider government. But in terms of whether Michael Gove will be seen to have delivered, it's perfectly possible that tomorrow we might see lots of positive reaction for the white paper, but still a pretty negative response to the wider response of what levelling up will actually mean for the North of England, partly because the Treasury and Prime Minister's office, as it will now be called, haven't got their act together.
But didn't you get to the nub of the issue there? That in lots of ways you can come up with lots of policies, but they have to be paid for. And there is lots of suggestions that actually lots of this is not going to be new money, if any at all, but rather just recycling and packaging together the initiatives, maybe in a relatively coherent way, but initiatives that have already been part funded.
I think you make a good point, Darren, as always. And I think what I would observe is we've seen more worrying detail today. So the education package has already been announced, and they've announced numbers of areas across the country are going to win with extra support from Hartlepool down to Wakefield, across to many parts of the Northwest, down to the Isle of Wight as well. What is sort of hidden in that announcement is there's no detail of what's going to happen to the government's opportunity areas. These include in the North of England, Doncaster, Bradford, Blackpool, Oldham, Scarborough and the coast there, all areas that have had real challenges for education for a number of years. Now, Justine Greening devolved real money to local boards to invest in local schools. There's no clarity that that programme's actually going to continue or anything equivalent to it be presented. In fact, we just got the offer that we might pay a little bit to some teachers in certain places, and they might get lucky and win a jackpot and get a selective sixth form college. Well, in the case of Hartlepool, I think the FE college principal there observed on Twitter this morning, they've already got a college, they've got a sixth form college, and I think all the schools have a sixth form. So I don't think it's a jackpot they particularly want to win. So you've also got, as well as the Shared Prosperity Fund being light, as the FT also pointed out this morning, I know Treasury Select Committee in their report last week have made exactly the same observation we have. You then look at the education announcement that's come, and actually it potentially includes significant cuts to places like Blackpool and Bradford, those archetypal places you would thought would have benefited from levelling up. And when you look at it as an overall package in the North, when you include those rail cuts from the integrated rail plan, that was 34 billion less for the North of England last year, announced by the Transport Secretary and the Prime Minister. It looks very much like the deal we're being presented in the North of England might be much worse overall than what the Northern Powerhouse was delivering under previous Chancellor George Osborne and when David Cameron was Prime Minister. So even if you compare this Prime Minister not to any past Labour government, any halcyon sort of 20, 30-year comparison for some sort of glory years of public spending, when you compare the era of austerity, as it was called by the opposition at the time, with this government, actually when it comes to economic development, when it comes to education investment in the most disadvantaged communities, and when it comes to transport, this government looks like it's investing significantly less in all of them. And so, as you say, however good the white paper is, however good the principle of devolved institutions, so a mayor for North Yorkshire and York, a mayor for Cumbria, these are important things that will bring power and money out of Whitehall. But for the most disadvantaged places, many of which already have devolution, there might be real cuts. And if you're the mayor of the Tees Valley, Ben Houchen, we're projecting that he could lose half, if our estimates are correct, of his previous Shared Prosperity Fund, which has been what has reindustrialised that part of the country, which has been the main source of all of the investment that's gone into the Tees Valley for decades before he was elected as mayor. How is he going to justify, as a Conservative politician, that his own government are slashing all that money that is essential for local projects to get people back into work, for driving the local economy? I think it's going to put people like Ben Houchen in a really difficult position if that is indeed what the Treasury push ahead with. And if I was Michael Gove, I'd be quite annoyed with the Chancellor that he had left this sort of exploding bomb right on his doorstep when he's been given the job of trying to define levelling up and make it actually happen.
Fascinating stuff, Henry. And as you say, questions there for the government that we'll hopefully be putting them to them tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed, Henry Morrison there.
Thanks, Darren.
talking about the levelling up agenda. And just a reminder, it is Northwest Week here on GB News. Liam Halligan has been in Macclesfield today. Because I'm going to join him, will be in Burnley tomorrow and in Blackpool on Thursday, particularly covering this issue of levelling up and what matters to you in that part of the world, all part of GB News' attempt to get out of the Westminster bubble, to get out and around the country, to find out what you are talking about and what politics matters to you. So if there is a big issue, do get in touch. The other big story, of course, at the moment is the cost of living crisis. It's been a major feature of our news coverage on the channel, and it's a big concern for taxpayers too, with 56% of least well-off voters naming it as their top issue in a poll carried out by the Taxpayers Alliance. The research carried out suggests that the average household will pay over £1 million in direct and indirect taxes over their lifetime. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Joe Venture, who is from the Taxpayers Alliance. Joe, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Quite an extraordinary statistic in many ways, this idea that taxpayers could be paying over £1 million, or the average household over £1 million over their lifetime.
Well, exactly. And first of all, thank you for having me on, Darren. But yeah, I mean, when you look at that figure of over £1 million in a lifetime, I think one of the things that we at the Taxpayers Alliance have been warning about for some time is that, of course, the overall sustained tax burden is about to reach a 70-year high. I mean, that's a stark number in and of itself. But, I think when we're talking about the bigger picture, we can sometimes sort of overlook how this affects us all in the real world. And I think what this figure shows us in black and white is the sort of true impact that our high tax environment is having on ordinary families. I mean, it's literally making them into tax millionaires. And I think, what's worse is that this isn't some short-term spike that has sort of arisen out of COVID or anything like that. It's part of a sustained upward trend that has seen the lifetime tax bill of an average household more than double in cash terms since the millennium. I think this should really serve as a wake-up call to the government that, enough is enough at this point. A serious effort has to be made to reverse this trend, and at least in the immediate future, things like the national insurance rise certainly shouldn't be going ahead.
But isn't the problem, though, and this is always maybe it's a perpetual or perennial problem, so I should say, but the people are also expecting the government to do an awful lot more. I mean, if you ask people about whether they want to see the NHS properly funded, they'll say yes. If you say, do you think social care as a long-term issue needs to be sorted, they will say yes. Well, the government's response to that means more money, and in the end, that means more taxes. That the public kind of want both things. They want, not to use a term, but they want to have their cake and eat it.
Yeah, no, I certainly see what you mean, Darren. It's completely understandable that things like social care have to be paid for in one way or another. I suppose the question is how that's paid for. I think we need to tackle this attitude that tax rises are always inevitable. That we have to have tax rises to pay everything off. I mean, why is the commitment to cutting waste never inevitable? Why is it never talked about the billions of pounds that we know are wasted every single year? I think it speaks to this attitude that taxpayers supposedly have these endless pockets that are always there to be picked in an emergency, and that wasn't the case pre-COVID, and it certainly isn't the case now. So I think this really should be a catalyst for the government to try and seek out those savings and ensure that taxpayers are really getting as much value for money as they can, and whilst of course still delivering on those resources for frontline services.
And just finally on this though, Joe, we talk about the tax burden and we talk about it's been the highest, or it is expected, for 70 years. But all in all, compared to lots of other parts of Europe, actually, our tax burden is still relatively low. Is that not the case?
Well, it may well be the case, Darren, but of course, everything's relative. And I think a lot of families right now are really feeling the squeeze. And of course, when you see the upward trajectory of this lifetime tax bill, it really does have real implications for ordinary families. I mean, if you just look at people on low incomes, for example, in this, I mean, we talk about the average household, but of course, a lot of people fall under the average. This lifetime tax bill that we're talking about has a tremendous impact on people, particularly on the lowest 20% of incomes. If you looked at a family with an annual income of around £19,000 a year, it means that they're going to be paying around £450,000 of tax in their lifetimes. And, you can't help but wonder what that money could otherwise go towards. I mean, it could pay for a house, a new car, it could pay for the kids to go to university. I mean, that's an enormous sum of money for people on low incomes. And of course, it means that people in this bracket will have to work for around 24 years just to pay off the tax man. And what I would say is, can politicians look at people in the eye? Can they look at taxpayers in the eye with a straight face and tell them that that money is being spent wisely? And I don't think that is always the case.
OK, Joe, thank you very much indeed for your time here on GB News this afternoon. 15 minutes to 4 o'clock. Lots of you getting in touch. Fletch says, how can levelling up be funded post-COVID? Expectations are too high. Someone else, David Hender, saying, for many people, the North has been forgotten about and it does need massive inward investment. But because of the Red Wall issue, it's become politically expedient only to talk about the North when it comes to levelling up. What about the Southwest, where I live, or on the Isle of Wight too? GB Views at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to a few more of those before the end of the programme. But first, before we do, let's go to Wales now, because that's where the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has been taking FMQs today. And joining us now to discuss that is our Wales reporter, Lily Hewitson, who is in Cardiff for this afternoon outside the Senate building. Cardiff, thank you very much. Lily, thank you very much indeed for joining us. So what was happening at FMQs today? What was Mark Drakeford drilled about?
Yes, good afternoon, Darren. I am outside the Senedd, and just an hour or so ago, FMQs took place in the chamber just behind me. Now, the theme of today's questions to Mark Drakeford were largely focused on travel and transport, and resulted in a bit of a fiery exchange between the First Minister and the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies. Now, firstly, the lack of and quality of rail services in the north of Wales were discussed today, and it's no surprise to people living in Wales that trains in the north of the country are few and far between typically. Now, although the Welsh Government runs the operations of Wales's railways through Transport for Wales, the responsibility of railway infrastructure sits with the UK Government, so it's not a devolved matter. Now, the First Minister said during questions to him today that the lack of funding from the UK Government for railway services in Wales is pathetic and is a result of broken promises. Now, he made reference to how only 22 miles of railway line here in Wales is electrified, and the lack of funding that the First Minister was referring to in an answer to a question by Ken Skates was the result of the HS2 project, and the UK Government says that the HS2 project is a Wales and England project, but the line doesn't actually come into Wales. As Scotland won't benefit from HS2, the country will receive £10 billion to improve rail infrastructure there, but Wales gets nothing, as the UK Government says the service between London and Birmingham will benefit people here in Wales. Now, from trains to planes, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew R.T. Davies, had a rather, as I said, frosty exchange with the First Minister in the chamber today. Mr. Davies suggested that the £200 million the Welsh Government have put into Cardiff Airport, the Welsh Government-owned Cardiff Airport, should have been invested in making coal tips safer for valley communities instead. And this statement didn't sit well with the First Minister. He laughed and said the suggestion was absurd. And Mr. Davies asked the First Minister to work with him on a timeline to make coal tips safer for valley communities here in Wales. He's working on a 10-year plan with the Coal Authority on this. And I was expecting, Darren, perhaps some remarks on Sue Gray's report today, whether it was some comments or perhaps some questions. But there was absolutely nothing mentioned in First Minister's questions today. Sometimes Drakeford will give a line on his thoughts on Boris's leadership. Sometimes he prefers to keep tight-lipped. And today certainly was the question, the case of that. There weren't any questions directed to him on that. But today, Welsh Tory politicians have made the headlines for giving their support to the Prime Minister. One, for example, David T.C. Davies apologised for unacceptable culture, but said the Prime Minister should not resign. So we will have to wait for perhaps a comment or a statement from the First Minister on that.
Lily, thank you very much indeed. Lily Hewitson there joining us from Cardiff. Now, Boris Johnson's efforts to present himself as a key diplomatic player in the Ukraine crisis were dealt a blow yesterday as a call with the Russian President Vladimir Putin had to be cancelled, while the Prime Minister, of course, managed the fallout from Partygate in the Commons. The Prime Minister's chief spokesperson has now said that the call with the Kremlin will take place tomorrow afternoon instead. However, it's not yet been confirmed by Vladimir Putin's office itself. Well, the Prime Minister is in Ukraine, though, today and will meet with President Zelensky in Kiev in a bid to help calm tensions between Ukraine and Russia. But is that all he can do? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Keir Giles. He is an expert in Russia power projection at Chatham House. Thank you, Keir, for joining us. First of all, I mean, what do you think the Prime Minister really is hoping to achieve today with that visit to Ukraine?
Well, of course, cynics will say that he's just trying to distract from all his troubles at home, but it is fair to say that the UK has actually been doing the right thing for Ukraine and has been taking the lead when the EU is really nowhere to be seen and the United States is working over Europe's head. It's the UK that's actually been pushing the pace with rhetoric and with actual direct support to Ukraine. And now we hear talk of this three-way relationship between Britain, Poland and Ukraine, two of the frontline states resisting Russia. So the support that Ukraine is actually feeling from the UK at the moment is significantly more than they're feeling from the rest of Europe. And that will show in the warm welcome that Boris Johnson is actually getting over there right now.
It's extraordinary, though, that we've seen this divide, haven't we, between what some Western leaders are saying and what the Ukrainian president himself wants. You know, Britain has been one of these countries that's almost talked up the prospect of war, and yet President Zelensky seems to be saying that he thinks it is not imminent.
That's quite right. It's the US and the UK on one side and Europe, including Ukraine, on the other. The Americans and the British are saying, yes, the invasion is inevitable and it's almost imminent. The French and the Germans are dubious about it. The Ukrainians are saying, calm down, let's not panic. The worst thing we can do is actually hype this threat up into something it isn't. Now, there are a few different things behind it. First of all, for Ukraine, this isn't anything new. Let's not forget they've been at war for 8 years already. So any new invasion is just a step up in gear as opposed to a whole new conflict breaking out. But also, of course, they don't want people to flap at home. They don't want to unleash panic of an imminent invasion. They may also have different sources of information on what the Russians are planning from their own networks and their own intelligence from what the Americans and the British are seeing.
We're just hearing this afternoon also that there may well be a pact between Britain, Poland and Ukraine to strengthen regional security. What is your sense of kind of Britain's role in all of this? Because there almost seems to be a jockeying of kind of positions from different European leaders in being kind of the main diplomatic force. President Macron of France has, I think, tried to bring the two sides together. Germany views itself as the bridge to Moscow. Where are we kind of geopolitically in terms of the alliances, or that sense, as I say, that each country's trying to take the lead in all of this?
Well, it might look new, but in fact, Europe is just dividing along the same old lines that it always has. It's always been the northern European states and the frontline states next to Russia that take the threat seriously, and France, Germany, and the southern European nations that will play it down. So that's just been exacerbated after Brexit, where the UK's found it easier to pursue its own firmer line, its own independent foreign policy with dealing with Russia. And that's really brought it out as the leader on the European continent for facing down this threat. So in effect, these are not new divisions among Europe, but it's just more visible now that Brexit is over.
And just in terms of the actual prospect of an invasion, you're entirely right in suggesting that did happen many years ago, but another incursion into Ukrainian territory. How likely do you think that is? And is it, or do we get to a moment where that becomes not necessarily impossible, but very unlikely with the changing seasons?
Well, there's no doubt that Russia would certainly like us to think that it is about to happen. They are very ostentatiously bringing in everything that they need for an invasion, and that's still continuing. They're stripping eastern parts of the country of men and equipment and sending it all to the Ukrainian border, and they're also bringing up the equipment that they need in order to sustain an offensive. Now, most people are thinking that that means, yes, it's inevitable. They wouldn't be doing all this unless they're going to use those troops on the border. But that overlooks a couple of things. First of all, they're already getting what they want in some respects because the United States is buying into this conversation that Russia wants to have about the future of Europe. And there are plenty of other things that they can do with a lot of those troops. Let's not forget some of them are closer to Belarus than to Ukraine, and some of them have already moved into Belarus. So one possible outcome of this is Russia actually moving into a different country that causes a whole different set of headaches for NATO.
OK, Keir, thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis this afternoon. That's Keir Giles there from Chatham House. Thank you. Just bring you up to date in the last couple of minutes, Peter Aldous, who is a Conservative MP, has just tweeted that he is now calling for the Prime Minister to resign. Another Conservative MP seemingly thinking Boris Johnson should go. He's just written on Twitter saying that it is clear that he has no intention of doing so, and I've therefore written to the chairman of the 1922 committee advising him that I have no confidence in the Prime Minister As leader of the Conservative Party, I've never taken such action before, and I had hoped that I would not be in this position, but I am conscious that others disagree with me. I believe that this is in the best interest of the country, the government and the Conservative Party. So another MP handing in his letter to Sir Graham Brady, calling for the Prime Minister to resign. That is it from me for today. I'll be back tomorrow at 3, where I'll be in Burnley. Up next, it's Colin Brazier. But first, let's bring you up to date with the weather. Please, Mark.
Hello again. Although we've seen some brighter skies, even some sunshine in places today, it will increasingly turn cloudy in the west with some rain and drizzle, especially in the north by the end of the day. And it's blustery in the north. You can see the tightly packed isobars there as low pressure moves into Scandinavia. High pressure still to the southwest, in between a weather front which has cleared to the south for some time to allow those brighter skies. It's pushing back further east as we head through this evening and overnight. So that will build the cloud across western parts of the country, some hill fog over Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and it's across western and southern Scotland, northern England, and Northern Ireland for a time that we'll see some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle. We keep the showers going in the far north across Shetland with some sleet and snow here, but further south with the cloudy skies, it's largely a dry night, but a mild night. And a bright enough start to the day on Wednesday. Actually, some decent sunny spells coming through. It's across central and southern England where we'll see the best of the sunshine on Wednesday afternoon, whilst further north, generally cloudy with those outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle, especially for the Pennines, the Highlands and Grampians, southern uplands. But for many, it's a generally settled afternoon, and with the sunshine in the south, with lighter winds, feeling pleasant enough. The cloud will continue to feed in from the west and southwest overnight into the start of Thursday. Some heavier pulses of rain moving into central and western Scotland, the Northern Isles as well. Otherwise, the rain fairly bitty, generally showery in nature, but with the cloud cover and the breeze coming from the southwest, it's another mild night, so staying largely frost-free for the start of Thursday. Again, a lot of cloud in the sky for Thursday morning. Some breaks developing, particularly across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Otherwise, it's going to turn increasingly wet as we end Thursday towards the northwest of the UK. That rain clearing to sunny spells and blustery showers on Friday.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, good afternoon. In the next 60 minutes on Brazier, a major child sex abuse inquiry has condemned the police for ignoring the ethnicity of perpetrators out of a misplaced sense of political correctness. I'll be talking to the woman who originally broke the grooming story in spite of the editors who told her she was being racist. Also, in the next hour, Boris Johnson speaking in Ukraine. We'll bring that to you live, as well as talking to the Daily Mail's Andrew Pearce about the Prime Minister's chances of surviving Partygate. And I'll be joined throughout today's show by the former Labour Minister and Brexit campaigner Kate Hoey. That's all to come. But first, today's headlines for you with Miranda.
Good afternoon, it's 4 o'clock. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister is meeting President Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine to try to find a diplomatic solution to tensions with Russia. A call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which was due to be held yesterday, has been rescheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Samantha de Bendern from the Institute of International Affairs says there is still hope for a peaceful resolution.
Diplomacy is continuing, so that is always a good sign. And you have to remember that Putin actually has a lot to lose. And I think that the plans that Liz Truss unveiled yesterday to say that Russian oligarchs in Putin's close circle will be targeted have shown a very, very strong resolve to explain to Putin that the consequences for him personally could be rather dramatic.
Downing Street has suggested the public may never be told if Boris Johnson is fined for breaches of lockdown rules. The Prime Minister apologised yesterday after the Sue Gray report into alleged Downing Street parties found failures of leadership and judgment. Boris Johnson says an updated version of the inquiry will be published after the police investigation is completed. Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen told GB News the buck stops with the Prime Minister.
We've got a concession from the Prime Minister that he will release the Sue Gray report unredacted in full. All we've seen is 12 pages of filleted report, but that was actually damning enough. Serious misjudgments and leadership across Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, widening the blame, never mentioning the Prime Minister, but ultimately he sets the culture in Number 10 and the government.
Well, meanwhile, Downing Street says the Prime Minister stands by his comments in the Commons yesterday about Sir Keir Starmer's record as a prosecutor.
Leader of the opposition, a former director of public prosecutions, Mr. Speaker, he spent most of his time prosecuting journalists and failing to prosecute Jimmy Savile, as far as I can make out.
The Labour leader says claims he failed to prosecute the notorious sex offender are false. Sir Keir was Director of Public Prosecutions at the time, but he was not directly involved in the case. The House of Commons Speaker says he's far from satisfied that the Prime Minister's comments were appropriate. Scotland's First Minister says current COVID restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks. Speaking to MSPs earlier, Nicola Sturgeon says despite cases of the virus remaining high, recent data gives ground for optimism. The current restrictions include face masks in schools, hybrid working from home, and face coverings when using public transport and indoor public spaces. A man who killed his ex-girlfriend and her autistic son before going on the run has been convicted of their murders. Daniel Bolton walked from Skegness to Louth in Lincolnshire to kill Bethany Vincent and her 9-year-old son, Darren Henson, in May last year. He then led police on a 24-hour manhunt. Jurors dismissed the 30-year-old's claim of being on autopilot at the time of the murders. He'll be sentenced at Lincoln Crown Court on Wednesday. A driver who used his car to stop a knifeman as he stabbed a woman has been released without charge. Met Police say the motorist, who is known as Abraham, has been released after officers reviewed the law around self-defence and defence of another. They say they consider the 26-year-old a vital witness rather than a suspect. Yasmin Chafiyi died in West London last week when she was ambushed in the street by her ex-husband, Leon McCaskey. Around 1,600 Tesco staff are facing redundancy. The supermarket chain is going to stop replenishing stock overnight at dozens of stores, and some of its petrol stations will no longer be staffed out of hours. Tesco is also closing its Jack's discount shop, saying it wants to focus on its core business. More than 1 in 10 children are starting school in England without having had their measles, mumps and rubella jab. Take-up of the vaccine is at its lowest rate in a decade. The World Health Organization says 95% of children need to be vaccinated to keep measles at bay. But the current coverage for 2 doses of the MMR jab is around 85%. Dr. Sarah Kayat says even a small drop in vaccine take-up can cause problems.
We know that even small insults in that level can result in outbreaks on a population level. And I think with COVID restrictions coming down, travel becoming more popular again, we have to remember that there may be travel from more endemic areas where measles is more endemic, and that will mean outbreaks will start happening.
And for those of you nervous about flying, you might want to look away now. A British Airways plane flying from Aberdeen to Heathrow had to abort landing after struggling in strong winds brought on by Storm Corrie. It could be seen struggling to get a grip of the runway. No injuries have been reported. Strong winds swept across the country over the weekend, bringing gusts of up to 92 miles per hour. Well, this is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Brazier.
Well, hello there. This time yesterday afternoon, Boris Johnson was on his feet in Parliament. We brought it to you live, answering questions about parties in Downing Street. 24 hours later, and he's in Ukraine. Well, the cynics will say it's a smokescreen to divert attention away from trouble at home. Well, what does Kate Hoey, a long-time supporter of Boris Johnson's Brexit ambitions, but also a former Labour MP and now in the House of Lords, make of his current travails? Kate Hoey, thanks for coming in. Delighted you can be with us for the next couple of hours or so to think and ponder on today's news stories. And it's still very much the lead story today. What happens to Boris Johnson? We know where he is right now, and we ought to say to people wondering what he's going to be doing in an hour or so, giving a press conference, which we hope to bring live to our viewers. Is he trying to divert attention away from his domestic woes by being the great big foreign statesman, or is there a real threat with facing Ukraine, and does?
Well, I think if we didn't have this whole question of Partygate and all of that, Ukraine would be right up at the top headlines, because it's a very serious situation. And although we are not, I think, under any circumstances going to be sending troops into Ukraine, obviously recently the government has announced more support for the neighbouring countries. And I think the Prime Minister, I think the Prime Minister is doing what he should be doing, which is showing that the United Kingdom still is a really important player in international relations, and that he should be going out there and doing the talking, which I hope he'll be able to tell us, what's been happening when he gives the press conference. But no, I think that this would have been happening anyway. I'm sure he's probably quite pleased to get away from the House of Commons. I went over from the Lords yesterday. Quite a few of us went in to watch it from the gallery. I must
it's a blood sport.
It's quite interesting, having been there for 30 years, looking down on it from a different position and thinking, goodness, it really was noisy. I mean, it's noisy just even before he came in. And you think, that's very different from the Lords, where it's much more tranquil.
What struck me yesterday, actually, in particular, and you were there, you could choose your own shots in a sense. We were reliant on the images that we were fed back from Parliament. I was struck by actually how they feel it. It's so easy to be cynical about ersatz emotion and people faking being angry and all the rest of it. But anybody who looked into the face of Keir Starmer yesterday saw a man red-faced with rage. Whether he was right to feel that way is an entirely different matter. But even on the Conservative backbenches, there was high emotion, and it's not contrived, confected. It felt real yesterday.
No, I think a lot of MPs are thinking of their own personal experience too, because some of them have gone through very horrible family tragedies and have been affected by the lockdown. And I expect some of them maybe now are beginning to feel just that little bit guilty that they were so confident about locking down was the right thing to do. But yes, it was quite emotional. I mean, obviously the Scottish nationalist leader wanted to get put out. I mean, he always does. That gives the headlines probably in the Scottish papers today. And I think he went on too much. I have to be honest and say that I didn't think the Prime Minister was at his best yesterday. I gather he did much better when he went to speak to the Conservative MPs in the 22 committee in the evening. But I think in the afternoon, I kind of almost got fed up with him saying, I'm sorry. It becomes almost a repetitive...
Tony Blair who sort of pioneered the idea of the masochism strategy.
Yes, he loved it, to say,
I must have loved it.
And also, of course, one of the things that came out in the Sue Gray report, which was the drinking culture. I mean, that's not new to Downing Street. Definitely went on under previous prime ministers. Of course, what is new that it was during a time when everyone was supposed to be working, not working or not socialising. But it's, I've got to the stage now where, honestly, I'm beginning to feel bored by it.
Well, on exactly that point, I mean, we will bring our viewers the press conference from Kiev, Prime Minister, President Zelensky, talking about weighty foreign affairs. I can guarantee that a lot of the questions from the journalists will be about Partygate.
Yes.
Now, and then you'll get what always happens, which is that look of the look of befuddlement on the faces of the foreign journalists who are scratching their heads thinking, hang on, World War III's in the offing, and you're talking about where the cake was eaten.
Funny enough, I thought about that yesterday, watching the questions and the detailed questions and the continuous nitty-gritty questions. And I was thinking, how many other democracies would have the leader of their country being absolutely, taken to task over and over and over again, and really it was like a dog being savaged. It became quite almost. I didn't feel sorry for the Prime Minister because I know that I think he can handle it, but I'm sure there would be some people deep down who were beginning to think, well, actually, maybe this is just going a little bit too far, but that's the way we do things.
We've just been joined by Darren McCaffrey, I'm presuming because he wanted to keep a fellow soul from Northern Ireland company.
Indeed.
My accent will come back now.
Can I just add two things to that, though? First of all, talking about interest in this story, I still find it somewhat surprising. Stood in Downing Street for the last couple of days, and you stood next to CNN and American broadcasters. I got interviewed by Norwegian TV last week.
Oh, wow, so they were interested.
And you think, I don't know why everyone's terribly interested. It must be said, though, that we have seen this happen in other countries, actually. For viewers in Ireland will know that there's been a massive controversy about a lockdown party held at the Department of Foreign Affairs, of which a report has been published today, a champagne reception during lockdown rules. And I think one of the Scandinavian leaders had to resign again about breaking lockdown rules. So this is not a story that has, and we know, I think it was the very senior politician who'd gone to holiday in Greece. I think it was a member of the royal family, the Danish royal family, also got into trouble about breaking rules. So this is not something that's just confined to Britain. It is something that seems to transcend. And you understand why, don't you? Because a lot of people have had to put up through sacrifices.
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Yeah, irrespective of the leader, that many people in many countries feel aggrieved when whoever it is seems to potentially have broken the rules.
I think some people will be thinking, why didn't I actually break the rule and go and see somebody who was very ill or something? There will be people thinking like that, but also I think most people know, apart from those who were very, very ill and in care homes, most people did break some aspect of it. They did go out when they shouldn't have, or they did, so I don't think...
And then the counter-argument is, of course, but they weren't making the rules.
Oh, no, absolutely. But, that's why I was saying earlier about Parliament, some of the MPs themselves now beginning to feel just that little bit guilty that they went along so strongly with the lockdown policies.
Can we just reflect on a couple of other stories around today in particular? We've got the migration figures in for this month, for January, so I should say. 1,341 people arriving in the UK, this on small boats from France. That is 6 times more than for the same time last year. Kate, you were saying you were in Dover and you saw scenes of chaos.
Yes, I went down just before Christmas. 2 or 3 of us we asked to go down and have a look at what was happening, and it was a very busy day. There were loads of boats coming in, bringing in people. What wasn't chaotic actually was the fact that they were all immediately, within a very short time, given all the new clothes, telephones handed back to them, had their COVID injection, heading off to a hotel. And, it just made you think that really, there is a pull factor, without a doubt. They were all in touch. The guys there told us about how they're in touch with everybody back in France. They know exactly what to say when they're interviewed. And I'm afraid until we actually show that we mean that we don't want them to come that way illegally, that we recognise that some of them are genuine, but an awful lot are just understandably migrants who want to come and have a better life. But that's not the way to do it, because they're actually breaking they're getting ahead of the queue of people who are waiting in places that want to come in. And also, the cost factor, they've just built this huge new, wonderful, I don't know whether you've been down there, wonderful big new reception centre that's state of the art, lovely showers, lovely everything. And it sounds a bit cynical, but I almost felt like saying to a sort of homeless man lying around the corner, just get down to Dover and come in a little boat and you'll be in a hotel in a few hours. Now, I know that sounds awful, but that is the reality of what's happening at the moment.
We're going to be talking about grooming gangs shortly. There's been a new report looking at the problem that's afflicted so many English cities in particular. And we were planning on talking to Julie Bindell, who's the journalist who first broke this story, I think back in 2005. In fact, let's just ponder on this, because I know we can't talk to Julie for technical reasons, that she's not been able to join us. And we are going to be talking to somebody else about it shortly. But I just wonder, Kate, we were talking at the top of the hour before we came on air about the Labour MP, Anne Cryer, who was the MP for Keighley. I remember going to visit her at home in Shipley, and she was so worried about this at the time. Grooming gangs, West Yorkshire. She was accused of being a racist for even broaching this sorry saga back then. And part of the story today is that Alexis Jay is saying the police are still not recording the data on ethnicity. And some people will say, well, why should they? What's it got to do with race? But actually, it has got something to do with race, hasn't it? We know there is a propensity, like it or not, as a matter of recordable fact, there is a particular disproportionality in the number, in particular, of British Pakistani males who are involved in these gangs. And we need to unpack why that is. Are there cultural reasons? Is there something around misogyny? What is it? What's going on there? But let's have the conversation.
Well, Anne Cryer, as you said, was incredibly brave at the time, and I remember her standing up, and even amongst the Labour side of her own colleagues, she was being criticised for saying what was actually factual at the time. And if only she'd been listened to at the time, we might not have got to the stage that we did. But of course, I'm always I'm genuinely keen on transparency as possible, and I don't see what the problem is, particularly in those areas, to actually say why, what race the person is. I really don't understand why people get so upset about that. And I think if we had been more honest about it, we'd be in a situation where people would feel something was being done. Once they feel something's been hidden, then they're not, they lose all confidence that anything's going to happen.
We'll come back to this and we'll stay with this story right now. Darren, hang on if you would. We're going to talk about Ukraine as well. So now you've taken a seat, you might as well keep it there. As I say, reports found that children are still being sexually exploited by grooming gangs in parts of England and Wales. The independent inquiry into child sexual abuse says the victims were being abused in, quote, the most degrading and destructive ways. The report criticised police for not collecting data about the ethnicity of perpetrators. It said a misplaced sense of political correctness was potentially to blame. Let's turn to Kim Harrison, lawyer who specialises in abuse cases at Slater and Gordon. Kim Harrison, welcome to you and thanks for your time today. This is part of a rolling inquiry into different aspects of this dreadful subject of child sexual abuse. What have we heard today in summary?
I think the point that you make about data is a really key one. And I think it's important to understand that there's not just a complete lack of data regarding the ethnicity of either victims or perpetrators of this abhorrent crime, but there's a complete lack of data about everything. So what the inquiry have found is that local authorities and police forces simply aren't collecting the right sort of data for us to even understand how big the crime is. And they very much likened it to them burying their head in the sand and increasingly underestimating the problem of child sexual exploitation that we have in this country. And that is very, very worrying indeed.
Because there was a feeling, Kim, wasn't there, perhaps, and only a feeling, I'm sure it wasn't backed up by the data, that this had been a problem that the state belatedly had recognised, that local authorities had woken up to, that politicians, senior politicians, had realised was a major problem in some of our cities, and not just our cities, but some of our towns as well. But the problem had been addressed. It hasn't been really.
That's right, and you've hit the nail on the head there. People said, you know, Rochdale, Rotherham, either it's all up north or it's in these sort of isolated towns, and it's all over now, and we know what the problem is. We've recognised it, we've tackled it. And actually, the inquiry report is very critical of that attitude from local authorities, the police and government bodies, saying, look, the problem hasn't been tackled, it's still there, and actually it's got worse. And it's developed and changed because of things like the internet and online grooming. So the report talks about the app Grindr, which a lot of male victims of CSE have been using, and they've been sort of groomed through those online dating apps to then be abused in a face-to-face way. And we're really not keeping up with the pace of change. So technology has changed how this crime is perpetrated, and yet we're still using old techniques to try and solve the crime.
Yeah, that's a very good analysis, old techniques, whilst actually the perpetrators are using new technologies to do what they do. And I just wonder also, Kim Harrison, whether perhaps some of our attitudes are pretty rooted in a way of looking at the world, because when it really comes down to it, when you look at the data, when you look at the people who are still forming the lion's share of the victims, it's kids in care, very often, kids who are let down by a system that's meant to take care of them. And I speak as someone who's got a lot of sympathy for people who work in social work. It's a really, really tough job. But there is a sense in which these are people that we'd rather turn a blind eye to. And there are those people who still feel they kind of get somehow, there is an element of just desserts. It's an awful thing to say, but I think sometimes that's evidenced by what we see.
That's right. And victim blaming is a big problem and a big part of this. Some of the language used within social services records and documents which was criticised back in, Rochdale and Rotherham inquiries, is still being criticised today by this inquiry. So people using that language around, they are putting themselves at risk of abuse, or they are promiscuous and things like that. So, very much victim blaming language, which doesn't help anybody actually, and certainly won't help people come forward and talk about what's happening to them. And you're right, they found that mainly children in care and also children with disabilities as well. So some of the most vulnerable children in our society are being groomed and exploited by these gangs. And yet we seem to have complete chaos over the data, what's happening and what we're going to do about it. And I think we need a complete reset now in terms of tackling child sexual exploitation in this country. We need to accept that we need to start again, we need to press the reset button, and we need proper policies to tackle this abhorrent crime.
Kim Harrison, glad you're talking about it, and glad you're talking about it to us. Thanks very much indeed. After the break, Whoopi Goldberg slammed for saying the Holocaust was not about race. First, though, here's the weather.
Hello again. Although we've seen some brighter skies, even some sunshine in places today, it will increasingly turn cloudy in the west with some rain and drizzle, especially in the north by the end of the day. And it's blustery in the north. You can see the tightly packed isobars there as low pressure moves into Scandinavia. High pressure still to the southwest, in between a weather front which has cleared to the south for some time to allow those brighter skies. It's pushing back further east as we head through this evening and overnight. So that will build the cloud across western parts of the country, some hill fog over Wales, northwest England, Northern Ireland, western Scotland, and it's across western and southern Scotland, northern England and Northern Ireland for a time that we'll see some outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle. We keep the showers going in the far north across Shetland with some sleet and snow here, but further south with the cloudy skies, it's largely a dry night but a mild night. And a bright enough start to the day on Wednesday. Actually, some decent sunny spells coming through. It's across central and southern England where we'll see the best of the sunshine on Wednesday afternoon, whilst further north, generally cloudy with those outbreaks of mainly light rain and drizzle, especially for the Pennines, the Highlands and Grampians, southern uplands. But for many, it's a generally settled afternoon, and with the sunshine in the south, with lighter winds, feeling pleasant enough. The cloud will continue to feed in from the west and southwest overnight into the start of Thursday. Some heavier pulses of rain moving into central and western Scotland, the Northern Isles as well. Otherwise, the rain fairly bitty, generally showery in nature, but with the cloud cover and the breeze coming from the southwest, it's another mild night, so staying largely frost-free for the start of Thursday. Again, a lot of cloud in the sky for Thursday morning. Some breaks developing, particularly across the Midlands, East Anglia and southern England. Otherwise, it's going to turn increasingly wet as we end Thursday towards the northwest of the UK. That rain clearing to sunny spells and blustery showers on Friday.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
27 minutes past the hour of 4. You're with Colin Brazier. You're on GB News on TV and on radio. Now, the actress Whoopi Goldberg has faced quite a backlash after appearing on an American talk show where she described the Holocaust as not being about race. She was appearing on ABC's The View, and there said that the Nazi genocide of the Jews involved, quote, two groups of white people. Amid growing criticism, Goldberg later apologised. In a tweet, she said, "On today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race, but about man's inhumanity to man. I should have said it is about both." She went on to say, quote, "The Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I have caused." Well, joining me now, Jake Wallace-Simons, the editor of the Jewish Chronicle. Jake, welcome to you and thanks for your time. What did you make of what Whoopi Goldberg had to say initially, at least?
It was bizarre, wasn't it, Colin? It was totally and utterly bizarre, and appeared to show such an ignorance of history, of 20th century history, that beggars belief, frankly. I mean, the idea that the Holocaust was not about race when the whole thing began, or one of the points at which it began, was the Nuremberg race laws, which codified Jews as an inferior race to Aryans or Germans and legislated for their separation, so they didn't defile the German race, and stripped them of citizenship rights so that the only people who qualified for citizenship rights were Germans and so forth. I mean, the whole thing was about race, and for her to suggest that it wasn't was really worrying and said a lot, I think, about the position that progressive America now finds itself in.
Jake, I think you might just your microphone might just have slipped down your jacket there. I don't know if you can just pull up your microphone a little bit. We can hear you, but it's not the best quality sound.
Is that better?
it's a little bit better. We'll try and boost the sound from this end of things as well. It's an important topic that we want to ventilate properly if we can. I just wonder with Whoopi Goldberg here whether there was, sometimes, I know we've talked about this before, that it's important to look at somebody's intention in saying what they've said. We don't want to have a situation, do we, where it becomes totally circumscribed. Any conversation about a given topic becomes an exercise in treading on eggshells, and therefore what's in somebody's heart sort of matters as well. This may have been someone trying to get something out that was nuanced, but actually came out the wrong way, or am I being a little bit too charitable?
I think you're being slightly charitable. I mean, I'm totally with you on that point, Colin, that it's important to look at somebody's motivation